there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. I hope this video finds you well and you're doing all right out there. Today we're going to look at the last 95 cards from Ikoria. So this is it, the final day of previews. When you look in the description below today, there's only one card that was previewed by a content creator, but that information is down there. And one other thing before we get started, if you go to flipsidegaming.com, you can still use the Heroes promo code to save 10% on orders over $10, but they are closed right now, so orders are not shipping out. Just wanted you to know that. All right, without any further ado, let's get into it. We're going to start off, as we always do, by looking at card variations on cards we talked about yesterday. So if you want to hear my thoughts on these cards in particular, you can look at yesterday's video. But as you can see here, we have some extended art and showcase versions of cards that we did not see yesterday. So we have Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, Regal Leosaur, Slither Wisp, Whirlwind of Thought, and Winota, Joiner of Forces. Alright, on to the new stuff. There are 6 rares to talk about today, but most of the cards are commons. I'm going to try to go through those commons especially pretty quickly so that we can get through everything today. Also, when I talk about the commons today, I'm going to focus mostly on limited. If there is a card that I think might see play outside of limited, I will mention it. But remember, most of these cards are going to be for draft or sealed today. So we'll begin with Adaptive Shimmerer. And it's a colorless card. It can fit into any deck. It does cost 5, which is a little expensive, but it has Flash, comes in with 3+1/+1 counters on it. There are cards that reward you for playing Flash. If you have some of those in your limited deck, this could be worth your time. Not always going to make your cut, though. Blade Banish is going to be a great white removal spell for you in draft or sealed. It's at common. You should be able to find these relatively easily, but they will go quickly in a draft pack, probably towards the upper to middle portion of the pack. It is an instant. It exiles the creature. It does have to be a creature power 4 or greater, though, but in this set, I think you're going to have plenty of targets, and it's very splashable as well. Coordinated Charge, I won't say this every time, but this has cycling. Boros colors especially care about cycling, so there could be other cards that make this one better, but this is going to be a good way to maybe close out a game if you're going wide, and again, Boros does care about going wide. White's going to create a lot of tokens, a lot of human tokens, so there are decks that will really appreciate this. It's not for every deck. And if you do play it and you're in a situation where it's not going to help you because you've fallen behind, at least it has cycling. Day Squad Marshal. This is a pretty good limited card. A 4 casting cost, 4/4 power toughness on the battlefield. In white, that actually feels very economical. And the 4/4 comes in the form, of course, of this 3/3 human soldier and a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Orzhov especially will give you rewards for playing humans. Again, I won't say that throughout the video, but keep that in mind whenever you see a human. And also Boros is trying to go wide, so there's a lot of decks that will appreciate this. Divine Arrow, this is a reprint, and this is a great limited removal spell as well. Another one at common. Instant, just costs 2, very splashable. It deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. It's not going to take care of everything, but it's going to deal with a lot of things you're going to encounter in draft or sealed. Imposing Ventasaur, the best thing about this card is it has cycling 1 and vigilance. Both of those things could matter in different decks in limited. But the creature itself is kind of underwhelming, so unless you really, really care about the vigilance in your deck or the cycling in your deck, I'm going to skip this one. Light of Hope. I like this a lot. It's cheap, it's instant, just 1 white. You get to choose 1, lots of flexibility here. Gain 4 life, destroy target enchantments, or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. In limited, I think this is very main deckable if there's room in your deck, because if nothing else, you could always put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and since it is an instant, it can kind of act as a combat trick. It's very cheap, it's not asking a lot from you, and if it's not going to make your main deck, then remember it's in your sideboard in case you need it. I do think this actually could see some sideboard play in Standard too. Main Serval, a few reasons you might want to play this. A, you care about Vigilance. B, you care about Mutate because this is a good base card to start mutating off of. Or C, you need to bring it in out of the sideboard because you're playing against a very aggressive deck like perhaps Rakdos. Perimeter Sergeant. This is good for a couple types of decks. Orzhov that cares about humans, and also Boros that wants to go wide a lot of times with humans and human tokens. If I'm not in either of those two strategies, though, a 3/2 for 3 is not going to feel great. Many times that's going to trade down. If I don't have a lot of humans or need the human support, I'll skip this one. Solid Footing. It's an okay combat trick. It won't always make your cut. It costs 1 white, flash, enchant creature. The creature will get +1/+1, but if the creature does have vigilance, then it's going to assign combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So if you do have one of those vigilance creatures that have high toughness, this could surprise your opponent. But even in draft or sealed, that starts to feel a little shaky. Like, I don't know if that's always going to work out for you. Most of the time, I think you can get away without playing this one. Aegis Turtle. This is good for a couple of reasons. Again, it's a nice blocker to sideboard in if you're up against an aggressive build. But this is also good with Mutate, because even though it doesn't have any abilities, you can get it out fairly quickly, maybe as early as turn 1 if you have it, and then you can start mutating in the future. It doesn't have any abilities, but it is a cheap mutate target, and as long as you have some mutate cards that have triggers on them, you could find some value here. Anticipate has been reprinted again. Good limited card, it always is. It doesn't hurt to have a copy of this in your deck. Avian Oddity. This is actually a pretty sweet uncommon. It's a 2/4 flyer for 4. Those stats are good in limited, not necessarily amazing, but can be good. It does have another ability though. It has cycling for a blue and 2, and when you cycle it, you get to put a flying counter on target creature you control. I think a lot of the time, you'll just want to cycle this late in the game. If you have a large creature that can't get by on the ground, maybe flying can help it get by in the air. Same thing's true of some of the menace cards that are in the set. You might have some menace cards that run out of steam on the ground, but maybe in the air they can get their damage through. Convolutes, you know it, you love it. Another reprint here. This is good in limited. Not every deck wants a counterspell. It depends on what your deck's trying to do. But if you're trying to be a little controlling, a little methodical, this is a really good one. It only costs a blue and 2. And most of the time, this is a hard counter in limited. But some of the time, at the end of the game, it might not do as much. It could be a dead card. And that is the risk you take with it. But most of the time, it's good. Crustacean. I'm probably not playing this unless my deck cares about flash, which it could. Or again, if I need to sideboard it in against an aggressive deck. Facet Reader. This is going to be good for you in limited. Looting is always fantastic in draft or sealed, so here's an opportunity to do a little looting. And there are some cards in the set that have payoffs for discarding, so that could come in handy as well at times. But regardless, you'll play this and be happy with it. Frostlinks. This is a good reprint. I play these all the time in limited, and I'm pretty happy with them. Tapping down a creature not just for that turn, but also for the next turn could allow you to get extra damage across or defend you while you kind of tempo your opponent a little bit and hopefully draw into maybe the answer for the creature you need to deal with. Also, in this set with Mutate, 3 casting cost 2/2 that can be used as a base card for your Mutate isn't necessarily a bad thing either, especially if you can slow your opponent down in the meantime. Frostveil Ambush. This card has a similar ability, but it's an instant here. 2 blue and 3, tap up to 2 target creatures. They stay tapped during their controller's next untap step. Cycling 1, so if you don't need to use the ability, you can cycle it away very cheaply. Yeah, if I'm in blue and draft or sealed, I'll be more than happy to run a copy of this in my deck. Glimmerbell. Another good blocker here. Again, if you need to side it in, it's there for you against the aggressive matchup. But this is really about Mutate. If I can get this out on turn 2 and start mutating on it, that untap ability could be quite good with Mutate creatures. Gust of Wind. This could be pretty good in the set. 4 to cast, 2 if you have a flyer in play, though. So maybe this is best in Azorius colors, but if I have a few flyers, that might push me into playing this card if I'm on the fence. Regardless, though, here's what I like about it. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. So not just creature, non-land permanent, and it cantrips. This could be good against Mutate, assuming the opponent doesn't have a lot of really good Mutate triggers and you don't want them to come back down and mutate over again. But if you just have a big oppressive creature with a lot of abilities you're trying to deal with, then this could really slow them down. Hampering Snare. This is going to be a very good blue combat trick. It affects all of the opponent's creatures. Creatures your opponents control get -2, -0 until end of turn. And it only costs a blue and 1. Plus it has cycling 2 to boot. Good offensively, good defensively. And if the situation doesn't present itself, you can cycle it away. Mystic Subdual. Another cheap card that can help defend you if you're in blue. It's only a blue and 1. It has flash, which is nice. Enchanted creature gets -2, -0 and loses all abilities. So not only is it a combat trick, but also if an opponent has an ability that's problematic, this is a way to deal with it. It also says mutating onto the creature won't give it new abilities. It can gain abilities in other ways. So yes, it can even put a damper on Mutate. Mythos of Aluna. Here's the first rare of the day. And this is part of the cycle that we have been seeing, and it's pretty good. 2 blue and 2 sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target permanent. That's not non-land permanent, notice. It's just permanent. And it's not your permanence, it's any permanent, so that's kind of nice. If red and green was spent to cast this spell, instead create a token that's a copy of that permanent, except the token has when this permanent enters the battlefield. If it's a creature, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So if you do copy a creature, then it also can fight. Sure, for 4 mana, a lot of value to be had here. This will be good in limited, even if you just put it in your deck not really knowing what you're going to do with it. The opportunities will most likely present themselves. Obviously, it's a rare. You're not going to see it all the time. But if you get to play with it, I think it could be really good. I think this will shine really, of course, in Brawl and Commander, where there's just better targets out there. Startling Development. This is a decent combat trick. Like, it's cheap. I'm going to give it that. And it has Cycling 1, which is nice because if you don't need it, you can cycle it away. But I don't know if it always makes your cut. Until end of turn, target creature becomes a blue serpent with base power and toughness 4/4. So you could attack in with a smaller creature. Surprise, it's a 4/4 now. Or if your opponent attacks in with something like a 7/7, it could become a 4/4. Maybe that's manageable enough for you to block it and destroy it. So yeah, it's a little situational, I think, but sometimes you'll play it. Wingspan Mentor, another uncommon, and another card that closes out a cycle. This time, for a blue and 2, you get a 1/3 human wizard. When this enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on target non-human creature you control. So you can't put it on this. Pay a blue and 2 and tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with flying. This will be best in Azorius builds, but if you have a fair amount of flyers, no matter what color you're in, this could be really, really good. And even if I just give one creature flying and that's all I got, that could be good enough too. I mean, having a big evasive flyer, if I'm able to give this to even like a 4/4 creature, that could be hard to deal with. And every turn I can make it a little bit bigger with +1/+1 counters. It's not like a till end of turn thing. What I like about these cards in general is they do make combat more difficult for your opponent. If you have this untapped and you have the mana up, the opponent has to assume that you could use the ability. The more flyers you have, obviously, the better this is going to be, but don't rule this out as an option even if you only have 1 or 2 flyers in your deck. Blitz Leech. Now, normally I would say this is kind of expensive, but I think this is actually very playable in Drafter Sealed, and here's why. It has flash, that goes a long way, and like I've been saying, sometimes that will matter. Secondly, though, it's a 5/2, so even though, sure, it's going to trade down on paper a lot of the time, it's still a surprise that the opponent might not see coming. But check out the ability here. When it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Remove all counters from that creature. So you could block a 7/7 with this, bring it down to 5/5, and there you go. You're just going to trade, and maybe in that case you trade it a little more evenly. Secondly, removing counters could be extremely relevant too. You need to get a flying counter off a creature before you can attack in, something like that. This card could have some extra versatility. The casting cost still makes me a little nervous, but I think in this set it's going to be okay. Boot Nipper. I like cards that let me make decisions like this. It comes into play either with a Death Touch or a Lifelink counter. A 2/1 for 2. Pretty good stats in general, especially considering the flexibility here. Most of the time in Limited, I'm probably choosing the Death Touch counter, but there are times you might go with Lifelink. Corpse Churn. This one's a reprint, but I like this card. It only costs 2, instant speed. You get to populate your graveyard a little bit by milling yourself for 3. And then you get to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. There's good value here, especially in this set. I think you'll be happy with it. Golgari Colors might like this the most in Drafter Sealed, but just in general, this is a fine card. Here's another reprint with Dark Bargain, and again, this is going to be good in this set. 4, at first glance, feels a little expensive for something like this, but sometimes you just need ways to see more cards in Drafter Sealed, and it will do it at instant speed, so you can hold up your mana, maybe if you're playing other control cards like a counterspell or something. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck. 2 of them go to your hands and the other into your graveyard. You take 2 damage. So you are populating the graveyard as well, especially Golgari will like that. And you also get to decide the 2 out of the 3 cards that you are taking to your hand and the one that's going into the graveyard. Again, being allowed to make a decision, even a simple one like that, does make the card more powerful. Deadweight, 3rd verse, same as the first. We have another reprint here, and you know what this card does. It's really, really good and limited. It's cheap. It's going to deal with a lot of problems, either by getting rid of the creature altogether or making the creature smaller. Durable Coil Bug. You know what I like. You know what I'm going to say. 2 2s for 2 with upside, and here's one right here. So this one, the upside's coming a little bit later in the game. Obviously, a black and 4 is going to be more of a mid-game play, but this gets to go from your graveyard to your hand, so you can replay it. And there's a few reasons you want to care about this card in Drafter Sealed. 1, because it is a 2 2 for 2, you're going to need cards like that to fill out your curve. And if you can play this one early and then it dies, maybe it trades for another 2 2 or something, later on when you're looking to build out your board state, okay, you can get it back to your hand and play it. Granted, now we're talking 2 black and 5 to do that. Feels a little expensive, but sometimes in Drafter Sealed, especially Sealed, you're in board stalls and you just need as much board presence as possible. Couple other things to consider in this set in particular. You have Mutate going on, so if you need a base creature to mutate off of, this only costs 2. Maybe you're milling yourself because you're in Golgari Colors, for example, like with the card we saw a few moments ago. This way, if you mill this into the graveyard, you still have something to do with it. You could sacrifice this, and even though it is expensive, later bring it back, sacrifice it again. That could come in handy as well. So yeah, it might not always make your cut. Sometimes you might even have better 2-drops in this set, but it's very good. Hunted Nightmare. This is kind of a nice little homage to the old Hunted cards. Now, this is not always going to be amazing for you, even though the stats look good. 2 black and 1, 4/5 menace. But look at the drawback here. When this enters the battlefield, target opponent puts a death touch counter on a creature they control, so they decide which creature. Ultimately, this is at its best if you're all in on menace and you have a really aggressive like Rakdos deck, because that way, if this dies because of the death touch creature, maybe if you're lucky, you get to take out 2 creatures, but even if it just turns into a trade 1-for-1, the death touch one dies, this dies, and the second creature lives. Your other menace creatures are still getting by for damage, and now your opponent still has to deal with that problem, right? In a vacuum, though, where your opponent has a lot of creatures and you don't have that many, it's not going to feel like it's doing that much. It's not going to save you, in other words, if you're behind. I will say this, though, if you have maybe a more controlling build in Drafter Sealed, you have a lot of creature removal, counterspells or something, you could potentially play this when your opponent doesn't have any creatures out. Then it's going to be really good. So it's definitely a good card in a lot of circumstances, but I don't know if it's always going to make your builds. If you're playing Brawl or Commander, probably most likely Brawl, I guess this could be interesting. You could give the death touch counter to one player and then attack a different player. Lurking Deadeye, I usually don't like creatures that are 4/2 for 4 because they trade down a lot of the time, but this is different. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature that was dealt damage this turn. You've played with cards like this in Drafter Sealed before. Many times they can be good. Memory Leak. This is going to be good in Drafter Sealed, especially if you're trying to be a little more controlling. Black and 2 sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand so you get information. You choose a non-land card from that player's graveyard or hand and exile it. And it has cycling 1. So if the game starts to go long when you draw this and your opponent doesn't have any cards in their hand, or they have like 1 card in their hand and you don't really care about what's in their graveyard, then maybe you can cycle and try to find some heat. But also there are some graveyard shenanigans in the set, so the versatility of this card will be appreciated. Mutual Destruction, good limited removal spell here, destroy target creature for a black, but as an additional cost to cast a spell, sack a creature. This spell has flash, however, as long as you control a permanent with flash. So again, here's one of the payoffs for having other flash cards. Now this might be at its best in like Orzhov colors where you're making the human tokens that you can sacrifice, or maybe you could sacrifice that 2/2 we saw earlier and then bring it back later. And there are going to be moments where you get this card when you don't have a creature that you can sacrifice, or you have creatures you don't want to sacrifice. That happens. But most of the time, this is going to be very good for you. Obviously, reminiscent of Bone Splinters. If you played with that card before, you can draw the comparisons here. Night Squad Commando. Again, this is probably best in Orzhov colors for the limited environment because it is a human. It makes a human token. Now, aside from that, it's a 2/3 for 3, which, yeah, those are okay stats. But if you can get 3/4 power toughness on the battlefield for 3, that's pretty economical. All you have to do is be able to attack in before you play it. Serrated Scorpion. Here's another good base mutate creature because it only costs 1. You can get it online quickly. When this dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. You gain 2 life, so that could be a 4-point life swing in Drafter Sealed. Yeah, you'll play this some of the time. It might not always make your cut, but it's decent. Suffocating Fumes. This could be a blowout. This is a black and 2 instant. Creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. Even has cycling 2 in case you're not able to really do much with it at the moment. So if your opponent attacks in and they think they got you, maybe they're running a lot of small creatures like Boros, guess what? You got them. Or you could use this more offensively, attack in, wait for them to declare blockers, and then kind of blow them out that way. Yeah, this is a real good common. Unexpected Fangs. This is a good combat trick. +1/+1 and a lifelink counter for a black and 1 at instant speed. Even if you don't use it in limited as a combat trick and you just want to give like a big old creature lifelink, this has got you covered there too. Unlikely Aid. This one's a reprint and it's another good combat trick. It's cheap, instant speed. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. Again, for Drafter Seal purposes, I'm happy to run a copy of this in my deck if I have room. Whisper Squad. Okay, this is a card that's probably better in draft than sealed. 1/1 for 1, nothing too exciting, but the ability here, black and 1, search your library for a card named Whisper Squad, put it onto the battlefield tab, then shuffle. So if I draft like 3, 4, or 5 copies of this, yeah, there's some value to be had if I have something to do with them, because a whole bunch of 1/1s on their own aren't very exciting. But if I'm trying to go wide, maybe Orzhov colors could care about that a little bit. There's also a lot of payoffs for having humans in Orzhov colors. So if I draft into that type of build, this could be good for me. Or if I have sacrifice or benefit cards and I just need some stuff to sacrifice, this could help me there too. There's definitely reasons to play it, but it's not always going to make your cut. And my Whisper Squad is dead. Blazing Volley, this of course is a reprint, and this is a good card as long as your opponent has a lot of small creatures. Probably something I sideboard in if I see my opponent has like a lot of 1/1 tokens. Maybe they're in Orzhov colors, for example, or perhaps Boros too. Also, if I'm in Rakdos and I'm really super aggressive, this might be okay. If I have a lot of menace creatures, being able to do this extra damage to the creatures might make my attacks a little more profitable. That could be fine as well some of the time. Ultimately, I think it's usually a sideboard card for Drafter Sealed, but you'll be happy it's in your sideboard when you need it. Blister Spit Gremlin. Okay, this is fine for Drafter Sealed. It's not always going to make your cut, but there are reasons you'd play it. It's another cheap card to use as a mutate base. And the ability is probably good in two different kind of builds, like Rakdos wants to be aggressive, and if they do run out of gas, which could happen, this could continue to maybe push a little more damage across at the end, get you past that board stall. Also, Izzet colors are going to be playing maybe a fair amount of non-creature spells in this set, so that could lead you to be able to use this a few extra times here or there. Ferocious Tigorilla, good limited common here, a 4/3 for 4, and you get to choose again, Trample or Menace this time. Rakdos might want Menace, but if you're playing a Trample-centric deck, or maybe you're just in Gruul colors with some pump spells, then you might choose Trample. Love it when cards give you options, though, like I said. Frenzied Raptor, this one's a reprint. I didn't like it then, I don't like it now. Many times this is going to trade down being a 4/2 for 3. I'm going to avoid this whenever I can in Drafter Sealed. Heightened Reflexes, great combat trick. It's cheap, just 1 red. Target creature gets +1/+0, and put a first strike counter on it. I love the fact that these combat tricks are pretty affordable. This one, you can't get much more affordable, right? And the creature keeps the first strike, which could be very relevant on a larger creature. And again, you don't even have to necessarily use this as a quote-unquote combat trick. If you have a big creature and you just want to give it first strike, you can do that for 1 mana, and that could maybe get you past a limited board stall sometimes. Lava Serpent. This one's a 5/5 with haste for 6, so it has haste. That makes me feel a little bit better. It's going to feel more like a 5-drop than a 6-drop. Also a cycling 2 in case you stumble. It's a good beater, especially in sealed. It might not always make your cut, but it's going to be there if you need it. Prickly Marmoset. Okay, this is one of those cards that will reward you for playing cycling cards. And this is fantastic. A 2/3 for red and 2 first strike. Whenever you cycle a card, this gets +2/+0 until end of turn. That's a pretty nice little beater. Even a 2/3 for a striker defensively can be quite good. So yeah, this is an awesome common. These will be good in multiples too. If you can grab like 2, 3, even 4 copies in a draft, having 1, 2, 3 2/3s on the battlefield with first strike can really slow your opponent down. And remember, you can cycle at instant speed, so having open mana means your opponent is not going to be able to engage something like this very well in combat. Pyroceratops, maybe not for every limited build, but there's definitely reasons to play this in Drafter Sealed. 1, I care about Trample. 2, I'm in Izzet and I have a lot of non-creature spells. If either of those are the case, I'll be happy to run it. Raking Claws is another really good combat trick that's cheap with cycling, this time cycling 2. But again, if the opportunity is not presenting itself, then I can cycle and try to find what I need. However, giving something double strike until end of turn as a combat trick for just 2 could be really good, not only defensively, but also offensively. If you attack in with all your stuff, especially some of those menace creatures, you could sometimes put away a limited game with a combat trick like this. Rumbling Rock Slide. This is a good removal spell for Drafter Seal that is going to scale with the game. Sorcery speed for 4, so it's more of a mid to late game play. But the damage to the creature is based on how many lands you control, which could become quite sizable as the game goes on. Spell Eater Wolverine. This is fantastic as long as you have 3 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard. If you don't, this is going to be a little underwhelming. However, again, with cycling as a threat, you could just cycle a card right into your graveyard at instant speed. Your opponent might not see that coming. If that's your 3rd instant and or sorcery, that could be a pretty bad surprise for them. So I like this card a lot in Drafter Sealed if I have cycling backup, or I'm in the Izzet colors and you know you're going to be playing a lot of instants or sorceries, or maybe I have some cards that are populating the graveyard that could help me get to that requirement. I think a lot of the time you'll end up playing this common. Adventurous Impulse, this one's a reprint. It's good and limited. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or a land card from among them, put it in your hand. The rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So what's nice about this is early in the game, if you need to hit lands, especially if you're trying to smooth out your colors, this gives you a look at some more cards that do that. Later in the game when you need to hit creatures, this can again help you get there a little faster. This could even see a little standard play this season. Excavation Mole, this has trample, which could be relevant, and also when it enters the battlefield, you mill yourself for 3, which could be relevant as well, especially in Golgari colors. Those are 2 good reasons to play this, but it's also a 3/3 for 3. In general, those are good stats for limited. Flycatcher Geraphid. This one is another card where you can make a decision, but I'm a little less excited about this one in Drafter Sealed. If I really care about Vigilance, then I'll play it. If I need to side it in against some flyers, I'll be glad it's in the sideboard. But 3/5 for 5 in general, even with one of those abilities, isn't super exciting most of the time. Greater Sandworm, this is a reprint, and I actually like this card in limited. The cycling puts it over the top for me, but also it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So if your opponent has a whole bunch of small creatures, they can't just push them together and block this thing. And this can be annoying at the right time, especially towards the middle portion of a Drafter Sealed game. 7/7 for 7, I don't think it's too much to ask in this limited environment. Honey Mammoth, this is okay, but in this set I feel like you can do a lot better for 6 mana. A 6/6 creature doesn't have trample or anything. I mean, maybe if you had a way to give it a trample counter or something, it could be more interesting, or a flying counter. But when it enters the battlefield, you do gain 4 life, and that's not nothing. I mean, that's a fair amount of life. But again, I just think a lot of the time you'll have better things in Drafter Sealed. Humble Naturalist. This is a great common for Drafter Sealed. It's going to help you ramp and fix colors. But you can only play this mana to cast a creature spell, so it doesn't take care of everything for you. But I'll let you in on a little secret. In Drafter Sealed, most of the time you're playing creature spells. You're going to be really happy if you can get this out on turn 2. Ivy Elemental. I like cards like this in limited, and there are some payoffs for having +1/+1 counters in the set. But what's nice about this in a vacuum is it just scales very nicely with the game. If I need to play this on turn 3 because I'm desperate for board presence, I can get a 2/2 out of it. If I play this on a much later turn, it could be actually quite sizable. Plummet is back again. Of course, this is a reprint, and this is great in your sideboard in Drafter Sealed when you come up against a lot of flyers. Remember, it's there if you need it. Ram Through. I guess I can just burn all my rabbit bites now. This is a 3-1 instant common. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So far, the card's really good. I mean, Rabbit Bite was good. If the creature you control has trample, so here's a payoff for trample, excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. Yeah, this is going to be awesome and limited whether you use it on a trample creature or not. Sudden Spinnerets, another really cheap combat trick here. Target creature gets +1/+3 until end of turn. Put a reach counter on it and untap it. That could really surprise an opponent, especially if they're coming in with a flyer. Yeah, I'll be happy to run one of these in my deck in Drafter Sealed. Survivor's Bond. This is a cheap sorcery that could replenish your hand really nicely as long as you have a human and a non-human in your graveyard. I love cards like this. They allow you to make more trades in the beginning of the game, knowing later on you'll have access to the creatures again. Also, this will be good in Golgari. If you're milling yourself, populating the graveyard, you might be able to get some good creatures in there that you can take back later. Here's the last ultimatum. It's Genesis Ultimatum, and like all the others, it's a little expensive. It's color intensive. Going to be real difficult to pull off in Drafter Sealed, but that's okay because you can play this in Brawl or Commander and be really happy with it. Now this card does have a little more variance attached to it. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest into your hand, then you exile this. But there's still a ton of value to be had here. Even if you hit a land pocket and you just drew 5 lands and they went into play, well, you got past those 5 lands, I guess, and maybe you'll start hitting some heat. And you should have plenty of mana to cast whatever you got. In Brawl, and especially Commander, you know there's going to be some juicy targets, and most of the time you're not going to hit 5 lands. If you can hit some big permanents with this, it's going to be awesome. And again, even if you hit instants and sorceries, for example, they go to your hand, so you're still getting the card draw off of it. There are ways to manipulate your deck a little bit too, like Sensei's Dividing Top, or even Scry, that makes this card more consistent. This also could see a little standard play as well, perhaps with Fires of Invention. Titan's Nest. This is actually really sweet. So let's talk limited first. It's a rare. You won't see it all the time, but if you're lucky enough to cast it at some point during a limited game, it's all value, especially considering the colors it's in. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. So if you are playing with some graveyard-centric cards, this can help populate the graveyard, but it also just gives you control over what you're drawing. So if I see a land on top and I don't want to land, off to the graveyard with you, I get another shot to hit some heat. Nothing wrong with that, or vice versa. So even if I don't care all that much about what's in my graveyard, this is still a good card. But wait, there's more. Exile a card from your graveyard, add colorless. Okay, so there are some restrictions here. It has to be a spell with color in it, and it can't be an X spell. But it basically gives most of your spells that could be in your hand Delve. You remember Delve, right? Like that crazy good mechanic. So yes, if you can play this in Draft or Sealed, if you have the opportunity, go for it. I think it's going to be really good for you, regardless of what you're doing in your deck. Standard, yeah, it's going to see play, probably sees Pioneer play too. There might even be a modern deck that could be interested in this at some point. And I think in some cases in the constructed formats, this could be a build-around card, actually. Now, you know what I'm going to say. This might shine the most, though, in Brawl or Commander, especially Commander. Again, you just have bigger cards, you have bigger plays. You'll be able to do more with this there than anywhere. Yorion Sky Nomad. Here's another rare and another conclusion to a cycle. This is the last of the companion creatures. And whenever I read online people discussing these companion cards, I feel like about half the folks there forget or don't realize that you don't have to use this as a companion. You can just simply put it in a deck. And if you do, you don't have to worry about the stipulation. Because the stipulation on this one is not good. Your starting deck contains at least 20 cards more than the minimum deck size. I'm going to say 99% of the time you don't want to do that. But let's talk Draft and Sealed first. This is a good creature. 5 casting cost, flyer, 4/5? Yeah, I'm playing this thing. And it does more. When it enters the battlefield, exile any number of other non-land permanents you own and control. Return those cards to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So if you had some enters the battlefield effects, bonus points, maybe you want to attack in with everything and then flicker them so they can block next turn. That's something else you could do with this. But again, even if I don't get any advantage from the flicker, I'm happy with the 4/5 flyer for 5. Now, yet again, this might be best in Commander or Brawl, where you could flicker a lot of things and have a lot of enters the battlefield effects, especially in Commander. I could see this being played in King Brago decks, for example. Sleeper Dart. This is okay. Like, at first glance, you're kind of like, it doesn't seem too amazing, but think about the environment a little bit. First off, this cantrips, and it only costs 2. I like that. Secondly, the ability, tap, sacrifice this. Target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. If I'm in, like, Rakdos, for example, and I just want to push across damage, I have a lot of menace creatures. Tapping a creature for a couple turns could make a big difference. Or defensively, if I'm up against a mutate creature with a lot of problematic abilities, I could tap it down for a couple turns. Yeah, it's okay in Draft or Sealed. You won't always play it, but remember it's in your sideboard if you need it. Springjaw Trap, another artifact that I think is better than it looks. It only costs 1, and it has flash, and that could matter. So I could surprise my opponent with this, and then once it's on the battlefield, it costs 4, tap, sacrifice, I'll deal 3 damage to any target. That includes the player, which could be good in a board stall. Yeah, again, it might not always make your cut if you have better direct damage spells or something, but it's there if you need it. Next is another rare, it's Bonder's Enclave, and this is a really, really sweet card. It can tap for colorless mana, pay 3, tap, draw a card, activate this ability only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So let's talk limited first. In this environment, yeah, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to activate this. You're going to have some big creatures. The only real downsides here are you do have to have that big creature. So if it gets destroyed or something, or there's a board sweep, kind of turns off the ability, at least for the time being. The other drawback is it taps for colorless mana in a set where you might be trying to go 3 colors sometimes. And if that's the case, then you might want to think of using this in one of your spell slots sometimes, as opposed to a land spot, because you don't want to run into color problems. Other than that, though, I mean, the card will be amazing in Draft or Sealed. You're going to be happy to run it. This will see standard play too, I have no doubt. This goes right into mono green Stompy very easily. Pioneer, I think it will see play there. And also, of course, Brawl and Commander, where you know you're going to be playing with some big creatures. This will be fantastic in those environments too. Evolving Wilds, great for this set in particular because, again, you might be trying to go 3 colors sometimes. And this is going to help you make that a little more consistent in Draft or Sealed. Now, at the time of recording, they haven't said this yet, but I'm assuming this might actually show up some of the time in the land spot because these next 10 cards are also being reprinted. You get all the gain lands again. So you have Bloodfell Caves, Blossoming Sands, Dismal Backwater, Jungle Hollow, Rugged Highlands, Scoured Barrens, Swiftwater Cliffs, Thornwood Falls, Tranquil Cove, and Windscarred Crag. So we saw this in the core set not too long ago, and I think they're doing it again. So sometimes you most likely will get one of the basic lands in the slot, but sometimes you might get one of these or Evolving Wilds. That's just my guess right now, though. So these will be good and limited to help you fix colors. Not a lot more to say about it. I do like the fact, though, that they all have art themed to Ikoria. Finally, the basic lands. We saw a few of these back when they first started showing some cards, but I'll show them all to you quickly. Here's your 3 plains. Here's your 3 islands, 3 swamps, 3 mountains, and 3 forests. And guess what? We made it. That's it for Ikoria and Commander 2020. Tomorrow, we're going to come back. We're going to do our market watch as we do every weekend. Until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Stay home, stay safe, take care of yourself and others. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.